Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and welcome to The Other Side of History. Now, in the last talk, I introduced you and talked a little bit about the book Truth Triumphant, and we are going to go into that book more, but in this talk here, the fourth talk, I would like to talk on the history of the Sabbath, and then in our next talk, the fifth talk, we'll get more into that book, Truth Triumphant. So Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." Now it is selfish to take from the Lord a whole or a part of the Sabbath for our own pursuits, when He has given us, out of His love, 6 days for ourselves to do what we want. Now there is a story that illustrates this point. There was a needy man, and he met up with a friend, and he asked him for some money. So the friend, he had only $7 in his pocket, and in the goodness of his heart, he gave to him $6, explaining that he reserved but $1 for himself and for his family. That night, the man who had received the $6, he crept stealthily up and he stole that other dollar from him. So this is the same as what we do when we are doing our own thing during the Sabbath hours. There is only 7 days, and God has given us 6 for our business affairs and common pleasures. Yet, have we ever stolen a part of this 7th day? It is easy to allow the cares of life to crowd us so that we take from the Lord a part of that one day that He has reserved for Himself. The Sabbath is a spiritual day, and therefore we must be spiritual in order to keep it. Because the Pharisees did not know the spiritual significance of the Sabbath, in order to preserve the sanctity of that day, they adopted a strict regard of every outward detail in reference to its observance. There were actually 39 articles of Pharisaic taboo. Also, there were numerous subdivisions of things prohibited and permitted. For instance, a man who stood outside the house and handed something in was a Sabbath breaker, but he who received it inside of the house was blameless. But if a man, he reached his hand into the house, and the householder placed a gift within his hand, the man might withdraw his hand and then he would be blameless. Wool set for dyeing on the 6th day was not allowed to absorb dye stuff on the Sabbath, and an egg was not able to be placed near a boiler lest accidentally it be cooked. And it must also not be left on the hot sand, lest the same disaster would follow. Now, what blinded the minds of the Pharisees is that they did not realize that this real burden that they were carrying was the burden of sin. And this is what Christ wanted to show to the people, that no matter how they tried to observe outwardly this law of Sabbath keeping, it went far deeper than that. Sabbath keeping is to actually cut to the very heart of each individual, and it's to result in the crucifixion of the old man and a new birth experience. Even Nicodemus, he did not seem to get the real significance and meaning of what the new birth was. Israel, he knew, they knew that the city, it had been destroyed because they had not kept the Sabbath, and because they feared a repetition of God's wrath upon their city and their nation, they put forth every possible effort against what they regarded as even the slightest external disregard of the Sabbath. Yet, Sabbath keeping is to be a symbol of the resting from sin, which is something that is internal. If the Pharisees had understood this, they would not have gone to the extreme that they did in developing all these man-made methods in observing the Sabbath. What they needed was the power of Christ within their inner lives. And then the observance of the Sabbath and other requirements would not have been a difficult and a perplexing kind of task. The transits of the planets or eclipses of the sun and moon, they keep the 7 days of our week with a scientific accuracy. The weeks where we have today, the week, and it's made up of 7 days, this has actually always been. Professor A.H. Sauce, he says, the Sabbath rest was a Babylonian as well as a Hebrew institution, and its origin went back to pre-Semitic days. The Babylonians, they put a special stress upon this number 7. The whole week it points towards the 7th day, the rest day. Sunday was never called the Sabbath by any of the ancient fathers and historians. The apostles would never have dreamed of changing the laws that Moses had given. And Jesus Christ himself, he had declared that he was the Lord of the Sabbath, and he had sanctified it. The apostles, they knew how he had threatened any who might dare to abolish even one of the commands that had been given to Moses. Now, no one could dare to touch the Sabbath within Jewish Christianity. No one would think of changing the day within the Gentile Christian world either domain as far as Paul's influence had reached. Several hundred Sabbath-keeping churches, they were established there in southern India, and some were even found in China. Now, the original Celtic church there in England, Scotland and Ireland, they also kept the 7th-day Sabbath. Most of the Sabbath-keeping Christians, however, they settled there in the Alps, situated where Switzerland, France, and Italy all join. And we know them as the Noble Waldenses. As Christianity took over more and more of pagan Rome and her provinces, an attempt was made to destroy it. However, it was a losing battle for Rome. The Christians' response to Rome was this: kill us, torture us, and condemn us. Your injustice is proof that we are innocent, nor does your cruelty avail you. The oftener that we are mown down by you, the more in number we grow. The blood of Christians is seed. During this time, Constantine, he had been watching those Caesars who had been persecuting the Christians, and he found that they usually didn't have a very good end. They had a bad end. While his father, who was actually favorable towards them, he had prospered. It was this that actually prompted him to prepare an edict, which gave equal liberty to both of the Christians and the pagans. Now, if Constantine had stopped there, he might have been honored as the originator of religious liberty in the Roman Empire. But he had different aims in view. Constantine, he wanted to become the sole emperor of the Roman Empire because it had been shared up to actually 6 Caesars jointly. All the other Caesars, they were persecuting the Christians. And so, what Constantine did is he set out to win the Christian church without losing the goodwill also of the pagans. If he could blend the 2 religions into one, he would then win the game. He must melt together a purified heathenism and a moderated Christianity. Constantine's attitude towards Christianity was that really of a shrewd politician rather than a devout adherent. In the legislating of Sunday, he only sought to give really additional honor to his God, which was the sun god. In order to understand how Constantine moderated Christianity, we must know how the pagans were really at that time. The pagan religion at the time was Mithraism. The sun god was believed to be the beginning of the origin of all things. The day of the sun, Sunday, became the holiday or the feast day. The first modern calendar, as we have it today, was put into use in 45 BC, and it was done by Julius Caesar. The names of the days that we have now, they were used then. Just as the Sabbath is a symbol of Christ as the creator and the recreator of our lives, so Sunday was the symbol of homage to Baal, the sun god. Baal was the symbol of life and reproduction in nature, and in his worship, he was the patron of actually the grossest sensuality and even prostitution. We find an example of this in Numbers, chapter 25, where it gives that account of their worship that they did there at Baal-Peor. The pagans held no sacredness for God's laws. Their homes were doomed, for they had no absolute evils. Immorality was undefined. It was perceived that there was and there is holier alliances that are without the marriage bond than within it, and that anything tolerated by the world in general was right. The belief, such as was found in Christianity, that there is a right and a wrong, implied that there was a standard, and they did not believe that such a standard existed. These pagans, they really were just a bunch of demoralized individuals. Could Constantine succeed in merging Christianity with these pagans? We know that he did. And how did he do it? The Christians' early belief there in the Bible, it was torn down all the way to the cellar, so to speak. And then they were obliged to build up a new belief from the foundations. Gradually, as the church lowered its standards, many of the Greek scholars, they adopted Christianity, while they retained all of their heathen philosophy. And they carried these heathen philosophies right with them into the church. Soon Christianity became so much like the teachings of the pagans that there was really only one step between them. Franz Cumont, he's an expert on Mithraism, this pagan religion that was at this time, and he says of Christianity and Mithraism, the two opposed creeds, they moved in the same intellectual and moral sphere, and one could actually pass from one to the other without shock or interruption. The religious and mystical spirit of the Orient had slowly overcome the whole social organism and prepared all nations to unite in the bosom of a universal church. So this is where Sunday sacredness actually came in. The worshippers of Mithra, they held Sunday sacred, and they celebrated the birth of the sun on the 25th of December. When Sunday was imposed on the Christian world in place of the Sabbath, its son's birthday, the 25th of December, it was made into the birthday of Jesus. So incense, candles, holy water, asylums or monasteries, the ring in marriage, turning to the east, and the worshiping of images, all of these are of pagan origin. And they were sanctified by their adoption into the church. One heathen author, Faustus, he actually rebuked St. Augustine, and he said, "You celebrate the solemn festivals of the Gentiles, and as to their manners, those you have retained without any alteration. Nothing distinguished you from the pagans except that you hold your assemblies apart from them. Now the pagans, they indulged in sensual gratifications during their festivals, and the non-converted multitude there, who had changed over to Christianity, they persisted in this idolatry. St. Gregory, he saw this, and he granted them actually permission to indulge themselves in the same pleasures that the heathens there were doing, but he told them to celebrate it in the memory of the holy martyrs, hoping that after they would return on their own account to a more virtuous and regular course of life. I believe that any church that will take in such members without conversion and then allow them to continue in sin, they have lost all respect of morality and of what true Christianity is about. They cannot be in possession of the divine power of the gospel, which changes the hearts and the lives of people. Christianity that rejects the inspiration of the Bible, it has abandoned its foundation, and it stands helpless. It is like a ship that has lost its mooring. It's thrown away its chart and its compass, and it's drifting towards spiritual ruin. We must never abandon the ship, God's truth, the ship that will go through, the ship that has the Bible as both the chart and the compass, and is set apart by others by its day of worship. So if you have enjoyed this talk, I would just like to encourage you to click on that subscribe button. And I just want to thank you for listening, and God bless.